Hello and welcome to The Public Good. This is Andrea O'Sullivan from Partnership for the Public Good, or PPG, which unites over 340 community organizations working to build a better Buffalo. We're delighted to join you every Tuesday morning at 11:30 a.m. on Power 96.5 FM and Mix 1080 a.m. You can watch full video of every show on our YouTube page and follow PPG Buffalo on Facebook and Instagram for clips and links to access video and the full podcast of our show. And of course, you can always get great information on our website, ppgbuffalo.org. Before I introduce our guest, I want to highlight a new way you as a listener can interact with us here on The Public Good. We want to hear your thoughts on how we can build a better Buffalo Niagara. Email us at info@ppgbuffalo.org to let us know your ideas for change. We'd love to hear of community organizations you appreciate or initiatives that you believe deserve more spotlight. We also encourage commentary, questions, feedback on our current and recent episodes, so reach out at info@ppgbuffalo.org. Be sure to let us know where you're listening from and who you are. And now, back to this week's show. This week, we are honored to be joined by our long-standing partner and advocate, Donna Robinson, an organizer with Release Aging People from Prison. We are delighted to have RAPP on the community agenda for this year, similar to Alia Williams from Voice Buffalo for Youth Services, who was our guest here on The Public Good last week. Donna has dedicated her life to creating visibility for disappeared and forgotten incarcerated people. She also shines a light on the plight of underrepresented identities in jails, such as women and the aging population. So, Donna, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Andrea, for having me, and thank you so much for the Partnership for the Public Good and uplifting my plank for parole reform and really accelerating our two bills, elder parole and fair and timely parole, to the floor for a vote. I do appreciate that from the bottom of my heart.
Yeah, and Donna, you've been at this for a few years that I've known you, working toward these two bills in the state legislature. We're going to talk more about those. First, we'd like to start with an introduction. And Deja James, who is the wonderful regular host of this show, often starts out by asking folks what motivates the work that you do.
Skin in the game, basically. Ever since I was a child, I can go back as far as when I was 5 years old, and I'm almost 70 now. I had an uncle that was addicted to heroin, and he was in and out of prison. And my grandmother would take me to Rahway State Penitentiary in New Jersey every other Sunday after church because, this was her child. And as growing up a young adult, my brothers became incarcerated. Then it became my children, and not just my son. I often speak about my daughter who's incarcerated, serving a sentence of 15 years to life at Bedford Hills. Since her incarceration now, it's affected the grandchildren. So I'm no stranger to the carceral system, these visitations, the food packages, etc. It's nothing new. I say I'm not new to this, I'm true to this. But there's got to come a time in everybody's life where you say enough is enough and you start to look at the generations before you and the ones to come. And for me personally, I just had to pull up my Vickies, get off the side of my bed crying, and become active. And once I became active with different organizations, I found that I can help those who aren't able to help themselves. And to me, that's worth more than all the tea and chai.
And, as you know, at PPG, we work on so many different issues. We work on housing and neighborhoods, workers' rights, wages. And year after year, when I speak to advocates like you, you have lived the effects of mass incarceration and the broken system that we have in the United States. So to hear you say from your time as a child to seeing the impact on your own grandchildren, the intergenerational effects of mass incarceration that really undermine our chance at any of the other issues when you have families that are taken apart from each other for years. So tell us, and then we'll turn to the specifics of the bills, but how do you personally navigate the world after this engagement with the carceral system and so many branches of your beautiful family tree?
Well, I had to become involved. You know, you can always sit back and cry. And, oh, woe is me, why is this happening to me? But then you ask yourself, why not? And you have to get up and do something about it. I started out with an organization here in Buffalo run by Kareem Amin and Baba Ain called Prisoners and People Too. And once I became involved with them, they took me to Albany. We take this advocacy day, as you know, for granted. To go to Albany and go inside the state capitol building and you see all the opulence, the gold, the marble. You see the legislators. You find out the ins and outs of how the government works. The first thing that came to my mind was, this building was built on the backs of my ancestors and other black, brown, people of color, for probably less than minimum wage as we know it, for pennies, and tantamount. That is what incarcerated individuals are faced with. When you go into the building, every piece of furniture, every piece of metal, you pick it up, you turn it over. It says property of New York State. That means an incarcerated person made that for pennies. When I tell you less than 25 cents an hour, they make those. They build the women. They weld those grills that are in our state parks. Anything that's in our New York State universities are built and assembled by incarcerated people. So when I saw that, I became empowered. And it wasn't just my voice, but it was a collection of voices. And by RAPP being formed by formerly incarcerated people, they got it straight with no chaser from the inside. I'm walking this journey vicariously through them, through my daughter, through my grandchildren, and my grandson. But these people have lived these experiences. Just hearing about them and the way that they're mistreated and the poor medical treatment and the lack of nutrition, things that we on the outside take for granted. It just, I'm aggrieved by it. I am upset. So for me to idly sit by and let this continue and not say anything, I would have to hold accountability to my great-grandchildren.
And it's so interesting to hear you talk about going into the state buildings for the first time as an advocate. I often think of that when Regine, a wonderful member of our team, is taking our video here today, and she works with us on New Americans and immigrant access. And so I often think of that when we're, having folks that are refugees and New Americans, and they're going into even Erie County Hall for the very first time. That's intimidating. It's opulent, as you said, and New York State is the Empire State, and you can feel that sense of imperialism in the economy, and how you said property. We're all engaging every day with things that incarcerated loved ones have worked on for almost no compensation. A really good Buffalo professor of sociology, Erin Hatton, has a book called Coerced, all about forced work that she released in the last few years. And one of those types of forced work, or modern day slavery, really is the labor of our incarcerated friends. I'd love to pause and talk about RAPP. What is releasing aging people from prison? And tell us about the two New York State bills that you've been working so hard for. Oh,
most certainly. RAPP was formed decades ago by an individual who was incarcerated, and Mujahid Fareed was his name. He, along with Sophia Elijah, who is the executive director of Families, Alliance of Families for Justice in New York City, she was on board. Our beloved Kathy Boudin, she had served time at Bedford. We lost her to cancer a couple years ago, but we never stop uplifting her name. And whenever I go to Bedford to visit my daughter, I look at the barbed wire fences, and I remember her telling me, you know, they didn't have those fences until I got down there and tried to escape. But she was, and she still is in our hearts and minds as a wonderful individual. And then there's Laura Whitehorn. She's one of the only individuals that I know to have had anything to do with the bombing of the Pentagon, and served so much time in federal prison. Still, as frail as she still is a staunch supporter and member of RAPP. Well, they got together. They decided that, especially Mujahid, that they didn't care about individuals of color in prison. They didn't care to deal with AIDS. They didn't care to deal with elders who became old and frail with comorbidities that they weren't trying to treat, dying. And most importantly, the fact that when they went before the parole board, how biased and discriminatory that was, so that they would never get a chance or have any hope to be reunited with their families. And the crux of RAPP is reunification of the families. You know, once you start breaking down that family structure, there's nothing, you know. And I always say in the 60s they came in, they took the black men out of the house, and the women had to raise the children. I know personally for me, raising children, it was difficult, especially boys. It's hard for a woman to raise a man. And then they started locking up the women. So now you have the children. And you wonder why crime is increasing, because the children, they need direction. They need that father figure, that mother figure. As a grandparent and a great-grandparent, I can't raise my grandchildren and great-grandchildren. You know, I barely got through with my siblings and my children. And this is why they advocate so hard for the elders. And I believe that this is the only organization that does, because we need the elders to come back. Show that young man, that young woman, that life inside prison, you don't really want that, because you're not ready for that, especially if they're taking you in now as early as the ages of 16. Your brain isn't fully formed. You don't have any direction. I don't think you know what you're doing until you get to be at least 30 years old. So now you're locking them up, and they are being raised in prison, where they throw everybody in. If you're mentally disabled, you need mental health, they put you in there with people who are, you know, hardened criminals. They put them in there with people who are low-level, you know, come in contact with criminal behavior on such a low level that it's a melting pot for disaster. But then you have to think that that's the way that it was designed, and it's working just that way. So, but RAPP, it gave me a sense of empowerment. I remember Valerie Gator, the longest-serving woman in New York State, died at Bedford Hills, and she actually died on that day that I was visiting my daughter. And I came back to Buffalo, and RAPP said, would you come back to New York and speak about Miss Val, we all called her. And without any forethought or anything, I said yes, and I got on a train and went back. And I found that once you speak the truth, you can get other people to tell their truth. And this is what's going to make a difference. You know, they say, oh, if 250 people came to Albany and rallied for elder parole and fair and timely parole, then that would get our attention. That would get our attention. Oh, it doesn't behoove you to pay attention, because at least every 3 days, a citizen at any one of these facilities in New York State dies. That's not enough. You want 250 people to come down and talk. Okay, so, this is my task, my labor of love, my passion, to try to motivate people to speak up, speak out. I know we've all grown up next door to someone, or went to school, or even had a family member that one day went away, and we haven't seen them. People stopped talking about them. You don't know where they are. They're probably incarcerated. And even if you don't know anybody, there's somebody in there that's been there so long that the world has forgotten about them. Their family has died off. A brief card just letting them know you're not alone. There's strangers out here who are fighting for you.
Yeah, and so, Donna, I know these are not easy bills to advocate for, right? You have been at this for some years. I know from our work at PPG, anything that is around incarceration and justice reform in New York State and Western New York can be charged topics, and it's hard to advocate for them. And as you're talking, I'm always mindful that you all share the lost potential. I think some elected officials are nervous to work on parole, releasing people from prison because they think, we see these big headlines. Someone gets released, something bad happens. They don't want to be in the mix, liable for that action. But the everyday story and the huge majority that's missing from that, and that you all highlight, is folks being released from incarceration, rejoining our community, rejoining our family. As you said, they bring this wisdom and potential guidance to share. So can you tell us more about that? How can society, families, neighborhoods benefit from formerly incarcerated people coming back and joining us?
When I tell you that I have come in contact with some of the most astonishing, I call them icons, people who were formerly incarcerated for decades. Our executive director, for example, at Release Aging People in Prison, Jose Saldana. He went to prison when he was a young man. He was one of the young lords in the El Barrio in New York City, because of that long incarceration. He rehabilitated himself, because we know we're worth money as long as we're locked up. So rehabilitation to them would be like shooting themselves in the foot. We'd be able to come home and be productive and never come back. Well, he took it upon himself, like so many others, to read, get into programs, establish programs that, as I said, they didn't have any programs for AIDS. They would put them in solitary housing and actually wait for them to die. But human beings like Jose and others, our own Jerome right here in Buffalo, as I always say, he is the reason why I do this. It is people like him who come back and they just want to give back to the communities that they harm. I've come in contact with so many, and they have their own organizations right here in Buffalo and New York City. RAPP alone has built up 6 other chapters since I started with them 5 years ago, from Long Island to Buffalo. So there's no excuse that if you live in any one of the areas, that if you want to get involved, that you can get involved. People like Chuck Cohane right here from Buffalo spent all that time on death row. He comes up and out whenever I ask. There's just so many wonderful, magnificent stories, and then there's still more to come of people who I communicate with regularly, who are incarcerated inside now, who are waiting past these bills. Let us, and it's not a come get out of jail free. It is, look at me, who I am right now. I'm a firm believer that we should meet people where they're at. Nobody is the same person that they were last week, last month, last year. Everyone changes. But meet me where I am. Look at who I've become since my incarceration. I know individuals who've gone to prison, and in their time, they've gotten degrees. Some as far as a PhD. A PhD, but you have to get permission inside to even... You have people outside that are having a hard time with that dissertation and that thesis. Absolutely. Just imagine. But they don't tell those stories. They don't tell the Jerome Wright stories. They don't tell the Lamar Scott stories. They don't talk about the David Sells, the Brandon Dennises. They don't talk about the success stories. Oh, but they loop every time you pick up the paper. Oh, well, this person he did such a heinous thing. You did not sentence that person to life. The judge imposed that sentence while they were in the courtroom. Once they've served an adequate amount of time, they should be able to go before a fair and fully staffed parole board. People that look and who have had similar life experiences, not law enforcement 100%, because, they're going to look at the commission of the crime. Rubber stamp you, denied 2 more years. Whereas there's always a backstory. That never makes the media. You either have to be there or have to been told this in a vicarious situation. But they don't loop the success stories of people who have come home, started their own businesses, and have given back.
Absolutely. So 2 bills that you're working for. Elder parole is the first, which would provide incarcerated people 55 and older who have already served 15 or more years an opportunity for parole release consideration. And this would include some of the state's oldest incarcerated people. Some of the folks you've mentioned, I know their stories. Folks are going into incarceration, as you said, 16 years old, 18 years old, serving 20, 30, 40 years. Those of us who have never been incarcerated, from when you're 16 to when you're 35, 45, 55, you're not the same person, right? We all see that in ourselves and our families, I think. Fair and timely parole is the second bill. This would provide a more meaningful parole review process for incarcerated people who are already parole eligible and ensure that they are evaluated for release based on who they are today, not just going back to what their trial was about, but who they are today, including their rehabilitation, personal transformation, and their current risk of violating the law. So big changes that are really needed. I know that folks in your campaign talk about release and parole have gotten more and more restrictive. So less people are being released in the first place. I know from some of our partners and friends that you mentioned, too, that once you are on parole, there's so many restrictions, so many check-ins. Folks that are really raising their grandkids now, as you said, like can't even take their grandchild on an overnight trip across the state line to visit a family member without permission, all these very intensive restrictions. So tell us, what's the next step? I think you wanted to mention an advocacy day coming up that folks can get involved in.
Yes, actually, the first step is to become a member. Doesn't cost anything. We send you a nice T-shirt and a membership card. And what you can do after that, you sit down, you watch some training videos, or you can come in person if you're in New York City, or sometimes I go down there. You can ride with me to find out how you can become more involved, to actually come out and talk to people, to get them involved, to reach out, maybe do some prison visits, phone call, send a postcard, whatever you have the capacity to do. But as long as you do something, because I'm a firm believer in being proactive. And as an African American, I do not take it for granted that LWB is a crime. Living while black, just in case anybody needed that clarified. So at any moment we walk outside of our doors, I always say, we're a split second away from making a bad decision that can ruin the rest of our lives. So become involved. Know the ramifications. Know your rights. That way you won't become ensnared because they say it's easy to get in and it's hard to get out. That's a misstatement. It's like in the state of New York, even though they've done away with the death penalty, mass incarceration is real. If you could, you're not going to spend 50 to life in prison for jaywalking or killing a bad joke. We know that those are some of the more major and severe crimes. But trust me, Paul in the Bible, he changed. Mm. And that just goes to show none of us are throwaways. God doesn't look at us as being dispensable. Each of us are precious, regardless of what. Some people haven't had a first chance, let alone a second chance. So what these bills would do would give them the chance. Look at me. Because, it doesn't take a lifetime to realize, look, I messed up. I did something that ordinarily I might not have done. But under the circumstances, whatever they were, this happened. Well, cause and effect. But I know that I will never, ever do anything like that again. And there are people, and they're sitting there, and they're crying out for help for someone to help them. So they need us on the outside. They need us.
Absolutely. And I think the extraordinary criminal defense lawyer Brian Stevenson, I think, says something similar to Donna, where none of us would want to be judged on the worst moment of our lives. And that's what this system is doing, is judging people just on the worst moment of their lives and determining their whole future. So folks can go to rappcampaign.com, RAPP campaign.com. May 7th is the Buffalo Advocacy Day for RAPP.
Along with the UB Law School, we are trying to get as many individuals who want to go down to Albany. We can carpool. We can provide transportation. Get in touch with the RAPP campaign. There's an RSVP form. And we will make arrangements to get you down there ready to speak to your legislators. If you don't know who your legislators are, New York State .gov. Put in, find my assembly member, find my legislator, put in a little information and it will direct you. That is your voice. Contact them. They work for you. I don't want to pay anybody that's not working for me. So call them up. Let them know. This is imperative. I want you to do something. Stop kidnapping our youth. That money that you are putting into the carceral system, to build new jails, to pay more money for correction officers who are already being overworked. Put that money into the community, resource centers. I remember when I was growing up, we had a safe place, a neighborhood house it was called, where we could go. We could get tutoring, et cetera, et cetera. And don't lock the kids out because you think that all of them are troublemakers. You prejudge them by the way they wear their hair or what kind of clothes or the complexion, the color of their skin. You have to meet people where they are. You don't want anybody prejudging you. I don't want anybody prejudging me. Give them a chance. And they feel like, nobody believes in them. So they've given up hope. And then they turn to social media or turn to their friends. We've got to direct them where to go, where you feel like, okay, you have 4 friends. You better believe that 1 in the 4 of you will end up in prison. Mm. So you have to be ready on your P's and Q's, know your rights at all times, and get up and do something.
A big call for generational change and systems change, which Donna Robinson always brings to us so strongly and eloquently. So thank you so much, Donna, for the work that you do. And folks, check out rappcampaign.com. This is Andrea O'Sullivan with Partnership for the Public Good, or PPG, uniting over 340 organizations working to build a better Buffalo. And we want to hear from you. Send us your thoughts on the carceral system, parole, and modern-day slavery. What ideas do you have to better our community? Contact us by email at info@ppgbuffalo.org. You can send us a voice recording or a written email with your comments and thoughts, and let us know who you are and where you are listening from. It's the public good, giving our thanks to Donna Robinson with the RAPP campaign. Listen in Tuesdays at 11:30 a.m. on Power 96.5 FM and Mix 1080 a.m.